after, but before those presentations. So you can just talk about where you stand or what you're thinking, and then probably again after the presentation. Because the first part of the class is pretty critical in getting you on the right trajectory for your project. So I want to make sure you're getting enough feedback. I'm going to email you out after class the next reading assignment. Like, please stay up to date on these because they correspond to guest speakers coming in, like Mark Jeunnette, who's going to talk to you today about ethnographic work, and that corresponds to Hidden in Plain Sight, which was your reading assignment last week. And the next one's Poor Economics. And Abhijit Banerjee, who's a professor in economics here, is going to tell, and one of the authors of the book, is going to come in about 2 weeks to talk to you. So please stay up to speed on those. And yeah, I think, are you ready to start, Mark?
I'm ready.
Yes.
It doesn't look like the projector's ready though.
Okay.
Is there an old HDMI cable in this?
There usually is an HDMI cable.
Port with no cable.
I haven't gotten the HDMI to work. I've always had to use another one.
Well, my computer thinks it's sending a signal to a projector.
There you go.
There we go. Okay.
All right, so today we have a very special guest, Mark Jeunnette, who's an old friend of mine. We were roommates in 2001 at an internship, right, in Monterey, and even introduced me to but anyway, Mark worked for about 10 years, right, before coming back to grad school?
8 minutes.
Okay, yeah, and worked with like IDE, which is International Development Enterprises, IDEO, the big global product design consultancy, and so he knows all about ethnographic work. So he's going to talk to you today about doing ethnographic studies, and this really relates well to what you just read in Hidden in Plain Sight. So this is not a mic. This is for the.
It's just for the recording, right?
Yeah.
Michael, is it already on?
It should be on.
Okay. Okay. Good. Hi everyone. Let's see. I thought this was projecting.
Cameo and Mad Max, Mark.
It's actually a buddy of mine. I'm the one who took the photo. That was. That picture has nothing to do with this talk, but if you're really curious about it, I can tell you afterwards. Ethnographic research. The title of my talk is "Take a Step Back." I'll come back to that in a second. In general, though, I'm going to pose a series of questions to you, and hopefully I'll actually get you all to talk a little bit and respond, and we'll get a little bit of a conversation going. You're not sitting in your teams, are you?
They can reorganize when we do that.
We'll reorganize for the actual practice that we'll do a little bit later. But I want you to be thinking about your project as I go through this talk. In general, so I'll talk a little bit about why you should actually listen to me, if Amos didn't convince you already. We'll talk about what ethnographic research actually is, where is it used, why is it used. We'll go over a little bit about how to do it, and then we'll get to some practice as well. So first off, why should you listen to me? Amos said I've got a fair bit of research of experience. You can read that if you want, but really I want you to read the quote at the bottom. It's Steve Jobs talking about creativity, and in particular the last line, saying the reason they were able to do that, or be creative, was that they've had more experiences, or they've thought more about their experiences than other people. So part of my goal today is to get you to think more or a little bit differently about your experiences and about other people's experiences through this talk. So, what is ethnography? People, cultures, yep. So really the study of humans and what do we do and why do we do them. So why do we do ethnographic research? To focus a product. So let's write some of these down. So dig into that a little bit more. What's the ethnographic research about if you're looking to tune a product for a particular country or a particular market?
Understanding that one view of somebody else.
Okay. So understanding a point of view. Why else would you do ethnographic research?
Find the specific need of people.
To find a need. Here.
To understand what makes people take certain actions,
Okay. So,
decision-making methodology.
okay. So what's behind decisions? There are a couple more hands up here.
To understand the spending and buying patterns, if they live as a large families.
Okay. So that's often connected to a market. So you're trying to tie a certain behavior to a market so you can serve that market.
Benchmarking what works and why.
Okay. Great. In general, for the type of ethnographic research that I'm going to talk about today, what we're looking for specifically is inspiration. So we're looking for new ideas. In the context of product development, there is absolutely a point at which you need to look for patterns, you need to see what else is already in the market, you need to understand people's point of view, but really what we're looking for is finding a user need in this type of ethnographic research that I'll talk about today. There are other types of research that you can go into where it's really getting evaluation of a product or finding out, okay, 60% of people prefer Coke to Pepsi. And that's useful for other parts of product design and other parts of marketing. But what we're looking for today is really inspiration. So I suppose I should actually write that down, shouldn't I? Inspiration for new ideas, new products, new markets. So where can ethnographic research be used? What fields?
Design or marketing.
Sorry?
Design or marketing.
Design or marketing? Okay. Right. Any field that includes humans, right? Because if you're talking about understanding humans and their interactions with a product or with a service or with a company, it all has something to do with humans. So where do we hope that it actually leads to in the context of this class? What are we hoping to get out of ethnographic research?
Successful implementation of product. People actually use your product and want to buy it.
Okay.
Clear design requirements.
Good. Anyone else? So yeah, you're looking exactly for those things. You're looking for new ideas, but then also how to make decisions along the way, because those decisions need to be based on the user at the end of the line. So places that it could lead to, new products, new markets. Does anybody recognize this? It's a little dated. This is the Swiffer carpet flick. Originally, the Swiffer is only used on hard floors for collecting dust. This was something that allowed Swiffer to expand into markets that included carpets as well. This was developed at IDEO a little before I got there. Ethnographic research can lead to new brands. This is actually an electricity provider in Germany that has banked a lot and worked a lot with giving feedback to users, which is what this prototype is about. New applications. This was a foam that was used in industrial applications that I think it's P&G is the one that turned it into a cleaning product. New ways of connecting with the customer. So this is a bank. This is also a little bit dated. Bank of America started this Keep the Change program where all of your purchases were rounded up to the next dollar, and those extra few cents got dumped into a side account that actually grew while you weren't really paying attention to it. New ways of making services tangible. This is work for Vodafone in Europe, a project to get cell phone pictures off of the phone and actually into your hands in a printed format. So new combos of business and technology. Who's heard of Play Pump? Have you already gone over it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't need to go through this. This is a bit of a red herring. So in general, I'm clearly a fan of IDEO's process and the whole design thinking mantra. You've probably seen this before. How many of you have? Or have you shown it, Amos?
They read the Human-Centered Design Toolkit.
Okay, good. So you all know this, right? I can skip over it. Cool. Man, I don't even need to do my talk anymore, man.
Yeah, we're about done, right?
We'll jump straight. Oh shoot.
It'll come back
It does this a lot.
sometimes. You might want to plug it in again.
Is this your dongle or is this the system?
No, it's just finicky. There you go.
All right. Am I missing anything? So, how do we actually go out and do ethnographic research? If the goal is to gain inspiration, to find a need, what do those needs usually come out of? If what you want your product to do is already served by someone in the market in some way, but you want to improve on it, where do those improvements come from? I realize that's a bit of an odd wording. Let's take an example. If we've got, let me go back a little bit. So what was the project that we did last year? So the fishing reel. Okay, you've got a fishing reel, and you want to come out with the next fishing reel. What are you looking for if you go out and do user research?
Where you can either add value or reduce costs.
Okay, say that in a slightly different way. If you're looking at the product itself, or you're looking at a user using that product, what are you looking to find?
I have wanted to know what problems the user is facing.
What problems the user has. So what are the sticking points? If you want to make something that's faster or more safe or more efficient, in some ways you need to be investigating the negatives, the downfalls of the current products that are out there. So that means you need to be looking for those types of issues. So, and back to this mantra from the title of the slide. Sometimes you need to take a step back and look at the larger picture. And in stepping back, you want to take and ask yourself the question of why are you developing a product in the first place? I think I want you all to sit in your teams because I want you to be able to discuss from this point on before the practice. So let's do that.
Two of us over here. Three of us.
Let's do it quickly.
I should have emailed you or mentioned that this morning.
I really like how you ask questions about each of the key thinking points. That's a good tactic.
Right here.
Yeah. Out of time.
I think it's a good idea. Can I come here?
If you want to make a little
You wanted to make space for the team that's sitting in your chair.
You could always have somebody sit right there. We touch everybody the same room.
you'll never
Lots of time.
I'll stop playing.
All right. You can take one of these too.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody pretty much set? So let's go ahead and get down to the nitty-gritty of this in terms of how do you actually do ethnographic research? And the first question I want to ask, and I want you to answer this in your team, and we may actually have people share a little bit, is who do you want to talk to for ethnographic research? So take a couple of minutes within your team and make a quick list of at least 4 or 5 different types of people that you would want to talk to about your project.
I can't remember if you have a part in the lecture where we kind of reflect about how they can do ethnographic work given the constraints that there are on campuses.
Yeah,
you talk about that.
Okay,
Great.
yeah.
Great. Yeah, it's a tough one to teach about this in the class because they can't actually do it. A lot of it physically, but I think they can certainly influence it and ask good questions about how it was done.
Part of the hope is that they take some of this into their conversations with their partners as they're thinking about that.
Yeah, because we have to second guess partners all the time. That happens all the time with us. We make that assumption.
This goes till 2:30, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm hoping to keep the last half hour for the exercise.
Okay.
We should be fine.
Cool.
Yep.
This is about our project, or just in general who we talk to if we're going to go to random.
This is about your project. Okay, I don't want to give you too much time. Hopefully you can build out these lists later on as the project continues. But who wants to say what team they're on and give me 2 or 3 types of people from your list? Anybody?
So we're Usha team for air conditioning system.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought we should talk to first the users, which are potential people in India who would use this air conditioning system, producers of similar products,
Mm-hmm.
and competitors to see what's already there in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And people who would service this air conditioning system.
Okay.
And maybe other potential users and other companies who have the same problem and could expand in other countries.
Okay. So you had sort of the end user, so in this case a homeowner that would install an air conditioning system, the people who would maintain that system, and people from other markets where Usha isn't already selling the system. That's good. One other? Another team?
For the scooter team,
Yep.
so we figured that talk to people in the European market who are using scooters with this displacement of engine.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to people who would be manufacturing this scooter, this engine with this new turbo idea.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps the sales and marketing team to try to identify what they feel about the demographic that we need.
Good. So we've had a couple of suggestions for both in India for the Usha team and outside of India or other countries that would use a similar product. I think, and that's great. I'm glad that you guys are looking pretty broad on this. One of the tricky parts, and we'll come back to this, is how do you actually deal with the constraints that you're in, that you have given that you're in this class and you can't just hop off to Europe to go talk to some salespeople or to talk to scooter drivers. But first, looking at the question of who you're actually going to talk to. We like to call them extreme users. So if you look at the typical users, let's say, of a cell phone, you're going to get some sort of bell curve between the users on one end that they really don't want to use a cell phone, they use it as little as possible, or they don't even have one at all, to the main group of people that these days they have an iPhone, they have an Android phone, and they use it, but it's just a phone. And then you have the people on the far end that I would say are super users or power users. These are the people who are changing the product into what they want to have. So they're the people that are installing the apps, They're jailbreaking their iPhone so that they can install the apps that Apple doesn't want them to install because they want to expand the functionality of the product or the device to turn it into what they want it to be. These two extremes are where you see a lot of new ideas and different thinking about products. So oftentimes for ethnographic research, yeah, we want to talk to people in the middle, but really we're looking for people on the opposite ends of this scale, because they're the people who think a little bit differently, and that's where these new ideas and where these new inspirations will come from. So go ahead. Recruiting is a tricky topic. It means there are professional recruiters that you can basically put together a list of a screening or a list of questions, and they'll use their networks to find people. You're going to be relying primarily on your partner, but I would also say work with Amos, because Amos has a really big network. And so if there's a particular type of person that you want to talk to, let's say it's another type of user in India. Amos, how many different partners and contacts do you have in India?
I don't know,
A lot. So a lot of it ends up being going through personal networks and professional networks.
But also observation is a big part of this.
Right. So there's
you can see people doing these activities sometimes. And I think Hidden in Plain Sight talks about M-Pesa, right? Is that in that book, or?
does it get M-Pesa?
In Hidden in Plain Sight, I'm forgetting where it was. But M-Pesa, which is a money transfer service, like that grew naturally out of watching people send phone credit to their family members in rural areas, and then the people would turn around and sell that credit. And people figured out, ethnographers figured out they were trying to transfer money back to their households.
So for some products and some groups of users, you have that opportunity. They're using the product in public. You can go out and watch people who are riding a scooter. You can go out and watch people driving a Ferrari, if you can find them. It may be a little bit tougher to get a real clear idea of the motivations and the problem areas for an air conditioning installer, because that's something that isn't necessarily public, that you can go out into the street and go find an air conditioning installer who's doing his job and start chatting with them. So some of it depends on the product, some of it depends on the particular type of user that you're looking for, but absolutely take advantage of that, of the situations where there are people who are already, the people you want to talk to are already out in public. So the focus groups, unfocused groups, have any of you taken part in a focus group before? So what's the experience like?
It was interesting. This was for the MIT libraries.
Mm-hmm.
So first they just asked us anything that you like or didn't like in the current library.
So they brought you all into a room?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They had us all in a room. Then they showed us libraries from other universities
Mm-hmm.
and asked us the same questions. And towards the end, we had that discussion about this. And towards the end, they gave us post-it notes. You could write notes. There were different boards.
Mm-hmm.
Of separating ideas into themes.
Yep.
And you would put your post-it into the board. You could reel it and notice that.
So what do you think about and you can go down a real rabbit hole with human behavior and the biases that we have in those types of situations, but as far as the number of ideas that you had sitting in a room looking at pictures of libraries, how do you think that would compare to the number of ideas you would have walking through a library or trying to do your work there? Did you remember every problem that you ever had in a library while you were sitting in that room? So the point I'm trying to get at is focus groups typically bring a bunch of people, a bunch of users into a room and ask them to think about past experiences that they had. And that's a much different tool and a different experience than me trying to go through an action. Let's say I'm working on an air conditioner and having that problem right in front of me. And so if you want to get ideas and if you want to get the sort of the earliest picture of where those problems are, You want to be at the point where the person's actually doing the work. So that's the idea of an unfocused group, rather than bringing a bunch of people into a single room and ask them to remember past experiences. You as the researcher go out and actually do observations directly where the work is being done. So that's really what I should have been talking about this on this slide. This is sort of what a focus room looks like, which I'm not sure about you guys, but to me it doesn't look like a really creative place for lots of ideas and inspiration to come out. So how do you actually do it? This is ethnography. You're studying people. This was a project that IDEO did with a hospital in the US, where they were trying to show what a patient's experience was like to the hospital board. And this is a human factors researcher at IDEO. He actually took that recording while lying in the hospital bed. I'm going through a couple of procedures. This is what it looked like. He took, I think, 3 hours of this, and then they showed it to the hospital board. So the key is, and this is what the patient experience looks like. So are there opportunities to improve this? I think you can probably, what are ideas? What would you do to actually improve this situation? Change the lighting?
Put a TV on the ceiling.
Put a TV on the ceiling? Anything else?
Bring like a healthcare professional into there, usually looking at someone's face.
Right, so you can rearrange the room to help make the interactions better, put something in someone's field of view that they wouldn't have seen before, and in general do something other than a bland white fluorescent light. But a lot of times, in this case, some of the question was more the hospital board and the fact that they hadn't spent much time in their own hospital. But if you look at a situation from the user's point of view, you can often see a lot of opportunities for improvement. So the notion that you learn most things away from your desk, actually going through a process with someone. So who here cooks? All right, who here bakes? I should have asked that a little bit differently. Okay, most of you. So what's the most annoying part about baking? Cleaning up. All right. So when you're cleaning up, what's the worst thing to clean after baking? Batter. Okay, so this particular project led to a new whisk that's a lot easier to clean because they went. I didn't have any plants in this room, I promise. You guys led to that one on your own. But the key is you need to get out away from the lab, away from the classroom, away from your team meeting room, and get out and actually meet people and talk to them. So how do you actually do that? The key is really observing what people say in order to understand what they feel and think. Does anybody here read XKCD? There is a really cool comic a couple days ago that sort of talks about the flip of this, about how we actually communicate and what language is. I think I have it in a later slide. But so how do you do this? How do you convert from watching what someone's doing to understanding what they feel and what they think? Any thoughts? So it all starts with empathy. So what is empathy?
Understanding other people's feelings, trying to share that experience that they're having.
Right? So putting yourself in their shoes, which is really what you're trying to do in ethnographic research. You're trying to understand the experience that someone else is going through, their background for that experience, because you can observe what they're doing, but unless you know more about them and more about their background, you don't really understand how they're reacting to what they're doing. So there are a couple of examples in here. If you start looking, a couple of examples about the types of things that you can look for. in order to understand that background and understand the way people interact with products and with services, and to really empathize with them. So one thing to look for is paradoxical behavior. This was an idea. This particular picture came out of a project that eventually led to the Panasonic Toughbook. The idea that people use their computers for things beyond computing. And rather than putting a warning label on a computer to tell someone, don't sit on this thing, or don't stress it in a particular way, they decided to make the product fit the use that people were actually putting it to. People don't always use products the way that you expect them to. And this guy, clearly there are other ways that you can put up a ladder, or there are other ladders that this guy could use to do what he's trying to do. In the example on the right, the picture, this guy was testing out a piece of software, and he went through a couple of exercises, and then the researcher asked him afterwards, well, so how did it go? He said it went fine. So if you're relying on someone's verbal response to a question to describe an experience after the fact, is that always going to be correct? Or is that going to match what his actual experience was? If you hadn't seen him make this face, what would you have thought based on his response? That your product is fine, right? But based on this, the product probably could be improved. People don't always mean what they say. So this woman was being interviewed really about television and shows and how do they interact with the TV. And so the researchers went in and they talked to her and they asked, well, how much do you watch TV? And she says, oh, I turn the TV on in the evening, I watch the news with my husband, and then I turn it off and go to bed. And that's fine. That's not, no judgment call, positive or negative. But then when you asked her to show, or when she was asked to show the researchers her home, she took them to the back room where she spends most of her days doing sewing projects. And there's a TV there. But she didn't think of that as watching TV. She just had it on in the background all the time. And so people don't always, the questions that you can ask don't always match what other people, or how do I actually say this right? Other people are not always going to interpret your questions the same way that you interpreted your questions or that you would interpret your questions. So a big point is to be ready to ask questions in multiple ways. And again, it comes back to doing observations, being on location, and getting people to show you things more than just getting them to talk about them, although talking about them is important. Some other things to look out for are these things called thoughtless acts. There's a human factors researcher at IDEO put out a book that was really just a collection of photos on this particular subject a few years ago. So what does this say to you about this particular subway station on the left? Sorry? Needs a trash can, or a recycling bin, or something. But why do you think the second person put their cup there? Because there was already a cup there. So there's a lot of it comes back to understanding how do people respond to other people's actions as well. So the one on the right, has anybody walked through an airport recently? Do you know what this strip is? Yeah. So it's same sort of thing that you'll see on right at the edge of a sidewalk and a curb cut before a crosswalk. So it's a change in texture in the ground so that someone who's blind can walk up to the edge of the sidewalk and knows that the street stops there, or that the sidewalk stops there. In this case, it's used so that people will stay on one side of the hallway. This guy, he's not blind, but he's staring at his cell phone. So now he doesn't need to pay attention where he's going because he knows that he just walks on the bumps on the ground. We talked about looking for sticking points or errors or bumps in the road. This is a woman who was a receptionist and had to arrange a whole bunch of conference calls and things. And she had a fully functioning conference phone. She could redirect things all she wanted. But this is how she set up a conference call. She'd put two phones next to each other and put them on speaker. Or if you've got a larger conference and two people wanted to talk to each other, she'd put them together. So what does this say to you guys about the existing telephone technology? Not easy to use, could be improved. So do you think you could take cues from what she's doing to make that phone better? How would you, if you wanted to, let's say, set up a conference call system and design a button to allow you to have two people talk to each other, what could it look like? Two phones next to each other. Body language is important. I know most of you are probably engineers and are not social scientists or anthropologists, but a really good designer is good at watching not just what people do, but how they do it. And so this is an example of an anesthesiologist. She has this device here in her hand that she uses to control dosage for the drugs that she has to apply. And this is the patient. But in order to operate this thing, she has to use two hands. So what this project led to is a device that with a thumb wheel on the side. So she can use the device with one hand, and that way she always has another hand free to hold the patient's hand. Because that's both comforting for the patient, but that's also really valuable information for the doctor, is being able to hold the patient's hand, feel how hard they squeeze, and feel the response there. And so watching those types of cues and watching the environment around the users that you're interested in, it can lead to real insights. So in general, tips for when you're going out to actually talk to people. Number one, get your subject to talk more than you. And clearly you want to talk about the product that you want to do, but you don't want to bias your users' opinions, and you want to get them to a point where they're starting to tell stories about their experiences. Observe the person, observe the space around the person. In general, if you're going out to talk to people, and I'd love if Amos and I could give you an assignment to go out and actually do some observations here as part of in Cambridge as part of the class. I don't think we have time though. Maybe I'll convince him next year. Take pictures and notes. Video is a possibility, although video can be cumbersome because then you have to go back and look through it later. But in general, in IDEO's experience, pictures and just observations are usually still pretty fruitful. I mentioned no more than 3 people. If you're interviewing a single person, having 3 researchers around them asking them questions can be a little bit overwhelming. So being aware of how you influence the situation is pretty important as well. I say be naive, and it's really about being willing to ask the dumb questions. If you, let's see, I wanted to go back to a different example, but being willing to not understand the first time and getting a user or a subject to explain something over again in different words can help you understand it better. Again, it comes back to trying to translate an experience into words, both from us understanding it side, but also trying to get the user to explain it in multiple ways to get that understanding across. And again, trying different techniques. It's not science, it's not engineering, it's ethnography, it's archaeology, it's anthropology. And I really encourage you to take a step back and try to look at the larger picture beyond the focus of your particular technology. If you are, I'm mentoring the cotton picking team, and we've already found a product that seems to do what the initial project description describes. And so where do we start looking for opportunities? If we take a step back and broaden our view a little bit, there may be some other opportunities functionality that we can add to the existing product, or other opportunities to pursue beyond only focusing on the mechanical part of the technology. So be, at least in this first part of your project, in your conversations with your partners, in your initial explorations, be sure to take a fairly broad view of the area that you're looking at to understand where opportunities are. And it looks like we've got lots of time for practice. So there are 6 or 7 teams? 7 teams. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is an exercise called Whose Life Is It? And each team is going to get, go ahead.
In the previous slide, you asked the subject when you say try different techniques, you mean try asking different questions from different ways?
We didn't get into too many specific techniques here. You can certainly asking different questions and asking questions different ways. If there's something specific that you're trying to discover about the way a group of people ranks priorities, there are other exercises and techniques that you can use in that situation. For example, if you let's say you want to find out whether a scooter user values efficiency or speed or power or initial cost, you can represent those somehow in icons or even just words and have them rank a list. So there are simple exercises or simple techniques like that you can use that you can look at the statistics afterwards and help you get a better overview of what the priorities are for a particular group. So there are a number of techniques like that can be used that they're outlined in the Human-Centered Design Toolkit.
The here section of the Human-Centered Design Toolkit, it's pretty good.
Right.
You read the second version that just came out?
I haven't read the latest one, no.
Yeah, we just did. Here,
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot better.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, good.
Comprehensive. Still not great on the downstream development. It kind of stops at prototype. The here section, awesome.
Good.
And also, hidden in plain sight is good for this too. They have
So I would, for initial research, often you just want to get some ideas from going out on observations. But when you have a particular question to answer, it's often really useful to use those types of techniques or those types of tools. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. So each team is going to get a collection of photos. I think there are 10 to 20 photos in each set. And you're going to get a worksheet. And all we're asking you to do is really fill out the worksheet. So each of these photos have been taken, or the sets of photos has been taken by one person. And I asked them to take pictures of their home, of their work, of their life, where they live their life. They're not actually in any of the photos, though. And so I'm asking you to describe the photographer based on what you see in their environment and based on what they chose to take pictures of. So can each team send one person up to get a set of photos?
Thank you.
Sweet. So. Yeah, it's just one there. So you'll take about, we'll give you 15 to 20 minutes to work through these, and then we'll talk about it. What time is it now?
I think at the end, we can have a good discussion about what are they going to do this semester.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember.
That was actually a big comment as well about in this class we're trying to teach them skill sets that they may not be able to use directly this semester, but they may use in their career, or they may use to influence their partners. Right? And so I think we should talk about that.
Yeah, I think we should talk about, we should definitely talk about the working with clients as well, because that's sort of another piece of not just on the first level of how do you get information from about users via clients, but the fact that the clients are a set of users as well, and you really need to understand them and their priorities.
And I also think we should probably bring up, like, if you think about realistically where they're going to be in their careers, most of these people are highly trained engineers. They may be at like an engineering center for a company that has an ethnographic team that they're interfacing with. You know, and so they want to understand the language. They want to understand what that team should be looking for in the field, and all that stuff. So yesterday, I got this photo from the shop. So they made the main band a couple weeks ago. And we had to make a cut, or not we, an outsource actually, had to make a custom end mill to cut the setting at the right angle and everything. And then they EDM'd this bridge piece, and the tolerances on this are 2/10,000ths of an inch. That's how crazy it is. Wow. But it had to be enough to be a slip fit into this slot, and then they're going to cut down the width of this piece so it matches the width of the rest of the ring. But and then I don't know if I showed you the full 3D model.
Additional slots in that arch.
Yeah, there's a cutout in the arch, and so these long legs are actually snap fits. So the way this goes together is you push it into the center of the ring, and the legs bend down, and then you push it upwards.
Okay.
These pins align, and then the legs snap into the side of the ring.
Yep.
I have to make a jig to assemble it.
Nice. No, I haven't seen the finished 3D model.
This was the trickiest cut. Oh, let me show you this other insane picture. She only texted it to me. This picture's insane. I gotta keep this. But let me open it up.
Is that on the?
This is when they cut it. That's the conrod. That was the only part in the whole conrod that was thick enough to cut this piece. And what's crazy too is that the center of this piece gets cut out because it's where the stone sticks down. There's a little hole right there. That hole is the oil channel.
Wow.
He had to center that hole correctly, and they cut around this pressed-in bushing. They were going to cut that out. But I think this is super cool because now the conrod is not affected. It's like it's total original geometry. But that was the only part with enough meat to cut this piece out.
That's brilliant. And so, how did they just drill the hole here? What's the discoloration I'm seeing?
So yeah, they have a plunge electrode.
Plunge it. So
Yeah.
a sink EDM and then a wire EDM to do the actual cut.
Yeah, I think that's how they did it.
Wow.
How crazy is that?
That's awesome.
That's a talented machine shop right there. This is
No
not an easy
kidding.
cut. Yeah. And then I don't know if you saw in my office, I've got her grandfather's Halliburton briefcase, aluminum, like James Bond-esque briefcase, that all this stuff's going to go in.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'll give her the whole shebang. And I'm going to have
slash tech, single, and kind of in her midlife stage. Looks like she's living in California. She likes the outdoors, drinking and woodwork and building stuff. Attitudes to technology, very supportive, early adopter. Key values, learning, doing it yourself, independence. Her dream vacation would probably be biking across the country and camping along the way. Attitudes, she's a vegetarian, she really likes the outdoors and music and travel and alcohol. Media interest, books, kind of a liberalish bent, no TV, and she likes to play guitar. Personal strengths and weaknesses, independence is her strength. Her weaknesses is probably she needs to socialize more. Next big life event, her next big travel or trip somewhere. Next big purchase would be the vacation. What do they care about? Order and experiences. And her personality or character is adventurous and living free.
Okay, so among the photos in that set, which one did you guys find had the most information in it?
You guys think?
One or two? Do you remember? In general, any team, is there a particular type of photo, or what was in the photo where you got the most information?
We had a selfie.
Uh-huh. Was that the one cutting her hair?
Yeah.
Okay.
One's great.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, same thing that Zach said. We had a picture of the fridge open. It's not anything.
Okay. So,
outside of a fridge with a weekly schedule, sort of,
okay,
and some business cards and kid stuff.
right. So anything else?
They have like family pictures, partners.
Mm-hmm. So the pictures or the images that you got the most out of, they tended to have a lot of detail in it, didn't they? So you had to look pretty closely. You guys mentioned books and liberal bent, and I think there's a picture of a bookshelf in there as well.
Correct.
So you probably got a lot of information just by reading the titles of the books that person owned. So what made you think that it was a woman and not a man?
What's the reason? So there was a picture of a leg.
Ah, okay, the airplane photo.
It looked like a feminine leg.
If you didn't have that photo, do you think it would be,
No.
would you be able to tell?
There's a message on the fridge to Annie. It's written.
Her name's Annie, yeah, you're right. So think about something else. If you flip the question for a minute and ask, what would have to be different in those photos for you to have inferred something else in your list? A big change. Gender, age, race, older, richer. The real key is to pay attention to the cues that you're picking up on and where those assumptions come from.
I think one thing that we noticed early on was like the vantage point was high, so we knew that it was an adult. Or somebody of like full height. So we were
Good.
looking at the fridge and you could see the top of the fridge, but if it's in a trial, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that was like our first guess.
Good. So taking that step back and looking not just at what's in the picture, but looking at how the picture was taken, because you're looking through a very particular viewpoint, both physically, but also from a personal standpoint of what does this person actually want to show, and what perspective are they trying to project. The pictures are exactly the same thing as if you're talking to someone. The person that you're talking to has specific choices about the words that they use, how they describe something. Some of those choices about how they describe something are going to be intentional. Some of them are going to reflect their educational background, their experiences, their age, etc. So the real key is to be aware of those things, not just in the case of the user, but also your own assumptions. So did anybody suggest something? Did one person on your team make a suggestion that you thought this person was X, and somebody else on the team noticed something else that changed your mind? Did that happen?
About the boyfriend of our potential.
Mm-hmm.
So we mentioned in one
photo there is a arm of a man, and this changed our opinion about her marriage, probably.
Okay.
So at first we were thinking that it's probably a stay-at-home mom or dad, because it's a lot of recruiters have boys and like mothers that are child abuse, and that there was a thought picture of the time in the middle of the day, someone who would stay at home, but we also thought that the pictures are probably taken the weekend, and maybe it's someone who works all day long, and that's when that person comes back home. They'd like to take pictures of things that involves the child in some way. And also, there are some signs of being disorganized, so we thought it could be someone who is more too busy to give the house.
Okay, good. These are all good observations. So when will you find out whether or not your observations are correct, if you're doing this in the context of a development project? When you meet people? Okay. So when you get when you go back and get feedback? Okay. Any other thoughts?
Also, like when we actually go and ask these relevant people about their information, like asking other positions.
So when you go out and talk to a user and you get your collection of observations and you bring them back to your design space, how do you know that your observations are actually true?
Presumably, you're going to get more than one set of observations, and looking for consistency between them would probably indicate that most of your observations are at least somewhat accurate.
In some ways, it's a trick question. Does it really matter if your observations are true? If they're true in the form of they're not false. Really, what you're looking for is useful information. You're looking for inspiration. And so whether or not the assumptions that you made on your sheet based on the photos are actually the facts of this person's life doesn't really matter. What matters is, did you get an idea of what their life was like, and does that feed into new ideas that you can confirm when you go back out and actually take a product to a user's, when you take those insights and that inspiration and turn it into a product feature or a design requirement. And so that's really to say, don't stress about it too much. Don't stress about making sure that you're getting it absolutely correct, that you get the truth of someone's life. It's more, where do you get inspiration from and where do you get ideas from? So there are a couple more topics that I want to get to really quickly. One is trying to do this internationally. So who here has gone and tried to talk to someone in a foreign country where you don't speak the language? And how many of you had tried to do this, tried to find a need, try to understand a product in that context? So what are the challenges that you faced? And I really didn't mean to put that slide forward.
Communication is a big challenge. You don't speak the same language. A lot of stuff gets lost in translation. Things that the way you ask a question might elicit a different response, and you have to be culturally aware of how you're phrasing something.
Good. So your presence can have a really big impact on that type of interaction, can't it?
These might have been up there, but I noticed that people were more forthcoming with information, certain people, with male team members versus female team members.
And that can go both directions too. I've been in situations where, as a male, I simply wasn't allowed in the kitchen. Sorry, nope. And so therefore I was completely cut off from a very core part of their experience. But I happened to be with Amos's girlfriend at the time. And she got to go in and she got to see that. That was in Ethiopia. So yeah, being aware of these things and when you're dealing with international situations, working through translators is tough. It makes a big difference to have a translator who understands a little bit of the methodology that you're trying to use, and can help translate the methodology in addition to translating the words that you're saying and that the user is saying. Dealing with experts in a field, oftentimes your clients or in this case your partners, they're experts in the field that you're going to be working in. And so, are experts always right? So, working with clients, and this is coming to the next thing that I really wanted to talk about, that Amos and I were going to talk about, is trying to do this type of research in the context of this class. Broadly put, did you want to talk about skills, or should I say?
You're right. I wanted to make one more comment about this.
Yep.
In our space is this gets really tricky when you're trying to test prototypes and you hand over a device to somebody where you want honest feedback from them. And depending on the culture, it might be very culturally appropriate for them to be very thankful and like really laud all the great aspects of your prototype, even when it's crappy. And I know for us doing wheelchair work, we had to break through that all the time, particularly in East Africa. That's where we saw it the most. And say, okay, that's great. Thank you for those nice compliments, but we want to hear the worst you have to say about this. And the more negative feedback you can give, that'll actually improve the product more. And so we had to come on to that same like understanding with each other and like partnership with each other before we got really quality feedback.
So Amos made a comment earlier when we were chatting when you guys were working on the pictures, that part of this class is to give you some skills that you're going to use not just in the project in this class, but also afterwards in your careers. And most of you are engineers, very highly trained engineers. And so where is this actually going to be useful moving forward? You'll all be working in, well, not all, but you may be working in a big company that has an entire department dedicated to this type of research, where you have to interface with a marketing team that's going out and doing user studies. And it helps to be able to speak the language a little bit and to have an idea of what that team does to get the information that you're using, and in the same way to be able to give them feedback. In terms of going out, there's something else I wanted to add to taking prototypes out to users. That was it. So who here has taken a taxi ride in a developing country? Have you shown the driver a map? Has anyone tried to do that? I see a smile and nod here. How'd it work out?
Awful.
So, show a business card, okay. What if you didn't have a business card? How do people, and I have a particular viewpoint on this. Clearly there are lots of different ways this can happen, but what are people's experience for how taxi drivers in developing countries navigate?
Landmarks.
Yep.
So they either know where they're going, or at least in India, if they don't know, there's always like 100 people on the road that you can ask.
Right. So there are landmarks, and there's asking questions or asking directions, or you get somewhere in the vicinity, and then you start asking, and maybe you have to ask 5 or 6 people, and you sort of take the average of those suggestions, and you use that to decide your direction. And the point is, the assumptions that we take going out into the field, that something like reading a map, we all grew up reading maps, doing that translation of a 2D representation into the 3D world, whether it's just setting up a map in the right direction and recognizing that this road represents the road that I want to go down here. That background can't be assumed in other contexts. And so, again, taking that step back and realizing that the people you're talking to are maybe coming from a completely different angle, and using that in your research is pretty important.
Just to add in perspective, so I grew up in Bangladesh and we don't use maps. And so when I came here and asked people for directions, they had to give the same directions because they're so used to looking at the map and like, okay, wait, I don't really know which way it is, but I just check the map. So the other one also didn't work.
Right. So that can be a really strong asset. Having that experience of coming to the U.S. and recognizing that difference, that can be a real asset going back, whether it's to Bangladesh or to anywhere else, and seeing how other people are approaching a problem or approaching a situation. Let's see. So we talked about translators. We talked about experts. I'll put up the summary slide that you guys can read through. But Amos also wanted to talk in the last minute that we have left, right?
Sure.
How do we actually do this with your current project? One thing that nobody actually mentioned when I asked earlier about listing your users, is your partner a user? Or in this case, a stakeholder? Is your partner someone else that you can try to understand that's going to have a particular perspective on your product that you need to understand, but also be able to work around and work with? So one thing in general, in some ways you're a consulting team, and one use that consultants often have for large companies is offering the client a different perspective, not necessarily the new innovation. Often the best thing out of a consulting project isn't necessarily the new innovation, but it's giving that client a different perspective on the same problem that they've been facing for a long time. I think I'll stop it there.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment too, that in this course, we're trying to expose you to elements of product design and engineering that you may not be able to use directly in this course, but you will in your career, which is what Mark touched on. And we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about like how do you set up problems, how do you engage with users, and I realize you can't travel to developing countries right now in the semester. But I think like the exercise you just did is probably very characteristic to something you may experience in your career, where like an ethnographic team in your company goes out, does a bunch of field work, comes back with a bunch of information, and then you're working with them to try to interpret that information and how it affects your engineering decisions, right? So I want you to think about that, like, how do you apply these skills in your interactions with your partner, and then how would you apply these skills down the road in your career as well? I'm going to email you some reading assignments to do this weekend, in which one of them will prep you directly